Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Poems and Potions. This month, our featured poet is Louise Roberson, and I am very excited for this interview. However, before we begin, a few things. You're going to hear us talk about the Meat Grinder Poetry Slam that was originally slated to happen in July, but that has been moved back to August 10th. Also, this was the second interview that we recorded, but I'm putting it in the middle of the season for reasons that will become apparent later. So if I ask some questions or get answers that I've already asked, that's why. And so, without further ado, I'm going to let Mandar take us into it.
So welcome. It's an honor for us to have Louise Roberson with us today, who has been extremely inspirational to both myself, I'm Mandar, along with Ryan. Louise Robertson's poetry has appeared or is forthcoming at Swim, New Ohio Review, Dialoguist, and many other publications. Louise's poetry has been nominated 3 times for the Best of the Net and twice for a Pushcart. Her full-length poetry book, The Naming Of, was released in 2015, and personally, her writing prompt workshops have been transformational for myself and several generations of poets through Writer's Block. So welcome, Louise, to this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yep, and I'll turn it over to Ryan to lead the initial part, and I'll come back at the end.
And I do want to thank you that attending the Meta Factory in August, that was cool. That was very cool. I should have sent you the poems that I made from it, just, so you can.
Yes.
I feel like as the person who helped inspired it, you deserve some of that. And I'll be asking about Meta Factory a little bit later.
Okay.
But to get us started, if you could please tell us your story. What is your origin? What got you into writing? What made you a poet?
Okay. I have a couple of origin stories, but the first one, it will sound a little disjointed and janky maybe to other people, but to me it's seamless. I went to a college, Oberlin College, that had a really well-known writing program. I did not participate in this program. I had not started writing before I went to college, and so I didn't apply to those classes, and if you don't get in those classes, you don't get into later classes. Okay, set that aside. But I didn't start writing until like my freshman year, and it really didn't get going until my sophomore year, but it felt a little bit like I was locked in a room with a Norton anthology and a notebook for 2 years. So in spite of the fact that I went to the school that's really well known for poetry, I can't say I was a part of that. Later on, I finagled my way into a class and I got a poem published in their journal and everything. But like, I really missed the boat on joining. So I started my real first origin story. I remember the first poem I wrote and the other little things I did that when I was first starting out. My favorite stories. This is how much you can tell I'm a writer, not a visual artist. I was in an art class and I had made this thing and I thought, oh, I need some words behind it. I need to just have like cascading words behind it. And so I just sort of freeform wrote behind it. And the art teacher said, well, the picture's not very good, but the words are. And I'm like, okay, like no sweat. Yeah. So 2 years alone in a room with the Norton anthology. And really that, and I know, I think it was my junior year, Carolyn Forche came to the school to speak. And if I wasn't already bitten by the vampire of poetry, I was after that. So I feel like Carolyn Forche, who's a phenomenal writer, phenomenal performer, came through, and just hearing her read out loud was just spellbinding and amazing. And she won the Yale Younger Poets Award for a book called Gathering the Tribes, which I just was amazing to me. I love the clarity of vision and the clarity of language and the incisive imagery. So yeah, that's the first origin story. I say it's janky because I didn't really go to a program. I didn't really have a community. I didn't have open mic or anything like that. And then I did take one class my senior year. And then I applied for a Master of Fine Arts at George Mason, which is where Carolyn Forche was. And I got in, but after I graduated college, I started working at a bank. And I was thinking I would just do that. But but I don't know if you know this. It's not that fulfilling to just work in a bank. I was one of those desk people, like open accounts person kind of. So like I decided I'm going to do this for MFA because I'm intellectually, and so I had a little while where I was doing both, and then I decided, well, they were like grooming me for management training, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. So I quit that job, and I got a couple fellowships and part-time jobs, and I just went and got my Master of Fine Arts. So yeah, I think I popped up a little surprise there because I'm not sure they knew I was going to show up.
Random question. How old were you when you went back for your master's?
Oh, 22?
22?
I was like, yeah, I felt like a prodigy because I was one of the youngest people in the program. Like it's always nice to feel like a prodigy at some point in your life. And that was the only time. Because like unremarkable school age, whatever before that. But Oberlin was good, but I was one among many who were just as smart as I was. So yeah, so I felt like little charm there. I got a big prize called the Mary Robert Reinhardt, really big prize called the Mary Robert Reinhardt, and a couple of fellowships and this and that. It was really great time in my life. Yeah.
I like that. I've been thinking about going back for my master's, but one, I don't know how to apply for any of the funding or whatnot.
Yeah, I didn't either. If I had known what I was doing, I would have gotten a TA. And I do believe that one fellowship was a pity fellowship because I did not teach as a TA. I was just doing it on my own. And they're like, here's a little money. Yeah. I really, 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 really think that one of the fellowships was like, we have to give her some money. I don't know, to keep her here, to let her not work part-time jobs all over the place. So, yeah.
I appreciate that because it brought you to us. So I'm
yeah, it had to happen.
So what's the second part of that origin story?
Okay, so near the end of that degree, I get married and move to Columbus. So I leave a job, my family. I grew up in Northern Virginia, McLean, Virginia, near DC and near George Mason. And I moved here with my then husband. So I left behind like a job and friends and family and school. And I finished remotely. It was fine. I wasn't losing. I had like one class, so I did that remotely. And when I moved here, he went into a PhD program. And so I kind of lost him too. So I'm just like here in Columbus by myself. And I went through a really dark period in which I stopped writing. And I got out of the dark period, but I did not start writing again. I rode bikes compulsively. I did lots of things compulsively, but not write. And fast forward, I have 2 kids. I've got my career off the ground. I'm in web communications. I'm like, I want to write, but every single minute of the day is called upon by someone, the kids, the job, the house, whatever, every moment, except for lunch. And so I coded a blog, and I was going to just write a poem a day and post it on the blog, which I did. So every lunchtime I would eat lunch, take a walk, and write a poem because that was the only time that belonged to me. And it turned out to be, it's a really good cadence for an aggressive writing program. Daily poems actually get to be a little bit too much, but many days a week dedicated I found is a good way to get restarted. And that was the second origin story of the lunchtime poems. Not to quote Frank O'Hara, who wrote a fabulous book called Lunch Poems, but I have my own lunch poems. Not as romantic as stopping by a typewriter in a store and typing out a poem, but yeah, and that was a really excellent way to get back into writing. As much as I'm that dorm room poet who only needed a notebook and an anthology to feel like that was enough to learn and grow on, it's nice to have a community. So I went looking for an open mic and found writer's block.
So before we move into that, I'm a little bit curious. Would there be anything that you would have done differently?
Well, not get married is a really big one. Except that I love my children so much. But I would have had, I don't know, I would have had other children. But I am who I am, and I did what I did because I am who I am. And I often feel like the general arc of my life probably would have been the same no matter what happened. I'm still the personality behind it. Most of what I regret are like, I wish I could have been more graceful. I wish I could have understood and managed my own emotions better. Some things I can't undo because I can be a little face blind. Like I regret whenever I've made mistakes with people that hurt them, even though I don't mean to. So like you have no idea how uncomfortable it is to not recognize somebody who you should recognize. But yeah. So it's a little bit
Ironic.
like you can't force yourself not to be face blind.
No, I actually understand that. I think I know I had said this at some point. I'm not sure if I was speaking with you or who I was speaking with, but I saw Tiffany, I think her name was. She was at one of the the Cauldron events, and she had been at one of Sue's workshops the week before. And so after the Cauldron event, she came up to me and she said, she's like, "Oh, it's so great to see you again." And I straight up asked her, I said, it's good to see you, but I don't know where I know you from. And that's when she told me she was at Sue's workshop. And I was like, I'm really, really sorry. If we were there, I would have recognized you, but I'm very, very, what's the word I want to use? Situationally dependent as far as like that face blindness and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you change your hair, I'm gone. I'm lost.
Yeah.
Well, if I know somebody well enough, right? You see how they walk. You see more than just the face. So,
Exactly. The body
yeah.
language. I'm big on voices. When I
Mm-hmm.
hear a voice, it's like, okay, I know who I'm talking to.
Just a side recommendation, Ryan. Have you ever watched BoJack Horseman?
A couple episodes.
Isn't it cool? Well, they have a lot of famous voices, and I I spent a lot of time going, "Oh, that is that person," or "Oh, that is that person."
Oh
So,
yeah, I'm a big voice chaser, so yeah, I always love doing that. And I know it
yeah.
annoys the people around me because I'll just shout it out. Leonardo DiCaprio meme.
Yeah.
Um,
Jason Lee,
yeah.
Amy Sedaris. Yeah.
So I brought up Cauldron, seeing Tiffany, which brings us to Cauldron's predecessor. And I think Mandar had some questions about this as far as
Yeah, so Louis, you got back to writing poems on a daily basis, and at some point you felt the need to have a community around poetry. How did you go about finding a writer's block? They had begun at Snaps at Taps, and they moved around a bunch of places.
Right.
So how,
They had 5 or 6 years before I showed up. I think I got on their email list. Okay, I got on their email list. I must have found it online. I maybe had a coworker who knew about them. And so I lurked on I mean, of course you lurk on the email list. I received emails, and then there was one from Scott was sending them, and there was a Wednesday that they were advertising, if you bring a virgin, get in free. And it happened to be on the same night as this, or I was working at Capital Law School at the time. Great place. And they were having a 100-year gala that same night. So I figured I could stack them. I could do the gala because I did their photography. I was their web person, but that means I did the photography too somehow. But so I was at their gala. And so, well, anyway, I want to say before I continue with that part of the story. So I get this email. If you bring a virgin, you get in free. So I write back to Scott and I say, does it count if you haven't read in 10 years?
Yeah.
And then he says the most Scott Woods thing ever. He writes back and says, "We'll see."
That is such a Scott Woods
That,
thing to
is
say.
it?
Shout out to Scott Woods there. So, do you by any chance remember the first interaction you had in person with Scott and Vernal as
uh,
you began attending Writer's Block? What was it like?
well, so the first venue I went to was called Barrister Hall, which is on just south on South High, just kind of just south of the highway. It was on the second floor, such a cool space, brick. It had its own bar, fantastic space, I thought. But you had to walk upstairs, and Vernell was like perched at the top of the stairs with a small table to take your money. That was my first encounter with Vernell. But you would look up the stairs and it just like draw all the way up. And so I don't know if she knew this, but that was sort of the feeling of walking stairs Vernell. And you know what a wonderful ray of light she can be, and a complicated, wonderful ray of light. And I since I had already gone back and forth with emails with Scott, there's a little bit of familiarity there, and I think we liked each other right away. Like, oh, you have two eyes, you have two eyes, you know. The interesting thing about Scott, like a lot of people, I didn't hear him read. I just heard him as an MC, and he is so charming and
Yep.
so good at navigating difficult, insecure people like me, like poets. And so it was a long time before I heard anything he wrote. And the first poem he read that I ever heard was called, I think it was called Streetlight.
Oh, wow. That is so interesting. Staying on Scott and Vernal a little bit, and you've obviously, seen them over the years. Talk
Yeah.
to us about them as hosts or MCs. They are pretty good. And one of the things they do really well, I feel, is that ability to reach out to a total stranger and make them feel comfortable. Right? They do that amazingly well. So we're just curious to see what your impression of them as host was over the years, not just at the beginning.
Well, I think at first I didn't know what I was seeing because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I just knew this was a place I could go. I had gone through a couple of open mics along the way. Even when before I did my big return, I would occasionally like write two poems and think I have to go to an open mic. And it would be some, thing that happened once and never again. And so I definitely felt something in the room that I didn't feel
Mhm.
in other rooms, even other rooms where I might have fit in more on the surface.
Yeah.
Because I have all that academic background, I have no real performative talent. Well, I might have one category of performance talent, but not like they do. And they're really, as you said, good at making people feel comfortable. And then they kind of do it in different ways.
Hmm.
Vernell is an open book. I don't
Yep.
think she can be anything else. And she's so good at keeping the energy up. You
Yep.
feel like nothing could go wrong. I think she is drawn to make sure things go right. Years ago, I might have said she's drawn to get on the mic, but it's
Mhm.
also when she senses of lack of something, she'll go in and fill in what needs to be there. I don't know how else to say it. Like if you had a room of just poets milling around, she would be the one who gets the mic together and this is starting now.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing you mentioned, and metacognitively, I felt the same, though I've never verbalized it before, is you know, you attend different mics everywhere. You go to writer's block once, and there is just that intangible feeling of, oh yeah, this is right for me, right? And then you have experienced something similar, right? You kind of felt that that was the place that you would like to come back to. Is that right?
Right. And part of it was the challenge of the room I was in. There are rooms I might have fit in better if I had tried. but there's something like seeing an atmosphere that you're not really comfortable.
Mhm.
You don't really know what the protocol is. I mean, some of that's going to happen anyway, just because I wasn't familiar with open mics. Even when I did my MFA and had read like in readings, but they were readings, not open mics, So not from, so some of that was new anyway, but it was a less white audience.
Yeah.
It was differently educated. A lot of people who just had to pull themselves into poetry on their own, which is a little bit more like my second origin story. So
Mhm.
I had sort of had that. I knew what it's like to kind of do it when nothing else is asking you to do it. You're not in school, nothing is making you write it. So there was something about that. But the thing that Scott does that I want to like, they're both so good, but they're their own people. One of the things Scott does, I know he thinks about it a great deal, right? He is a natural talent, et cetera, et cetera, but he thinks about it a great deal. So he uses all his vast intellectual resources to make himself better at this. Because I know
Yeah.
along the way he's said and done things that not everybody has liked, and
Yeah.
I know a few people have written in, but he works so hard. He studies comedians. He tries different things. He's very good at teasing you, which is what the
Mhm.
thing that sometimes goes wrong. But 95% of the time, it's perfect. And one of the ways he knows to identify the thing that you might be self-conscious about, but it's not something you should feel bad about.
Yeah.
And the story there was a fellow who came through, Rob. He stuttered. Somehow Scott was able to tease him about stuttering, because there's nothing wrong with a person who
Yeah.
stutters. It's just stuttering. But he was so self-conscious, and you could almost see him relax, like, oh, this is just a thing. I have brown hair. I have a stutter. It's part of the whole package. And he was very good at just making sure that there was no feeling bad about something you couldn't control like that.
I think that's very crucial. And even in my background, we do a lot of study on things like theory of motivation. And one thing you mentioned a little bit ago was the challenge, right? Like him having that incredible skill of drawing out that that intangible talent in you, number one. And secondly, the challenge of presenting in a room that is that way is a part of that motivation to go back as per several motivational theories. And one thing, continuing along that challenge route, for the audience of this podcast, uh, and then you have yourself said that you were, when you began at writer's block, new to performance, right?
Well, not
You
totally
are
new.
an excellent
Mostly
poet, but
new. Yeah.
newer
Yeah.
to performance. Yet, in those early times, you started being interested in poetry slams, right? So for the audience, could you start by first defining, for not, because not everybody is familiar, is how would you define a poetry slam? What is the National Poetry Slam, and how did you personally start participating in these?
Okay, that's a good question, because poetry slam is often thrown around, that term, and it's not always understood what it all means.
Yeah,
So, at its base, poetry slam is just a game you play with poems. Poets sign up, they get a certain amount of time to perform their poems in turn, and after your poem, you get a score, Olympic style, from 5 randomly selected judges.
uh,
If you poll those judges and ask them what their favorite songs and music were, they would be all over the map, right?
yeah,
They would be Shania Twain and Nickelback and, 9 Inch Nails. Like, it would be all over the place. And you would understand that everybody has their own taste, right? But you get 5 randomly selected judges. They give you a score, Olympic style. You drop the high, you drop the low, you add the 3 in the middle. And then you get a score, 0 to 30, from
yeah.
the middle 3. And that's all it is. And you can do different numbers of rounds. You can do different lengths of time. You get a 3 or 4 or 1 or 2 minute round, stuff like that. But basically, it gives the judges the power to say something back. And there's a lot that goes into a really good MC will make the audience understand something that it is a game. The best poets never win, they might say. Or, you have the quote unquote German judge. Like there's a lot of feelings that go into getting a score for your poem. So that's essentially at its base what it is. It isn't a style. It isn't a kind of poem. It isn't even a length. You can do a haiku in a slam, and it has been done, and that is it. But a lot of people apply the term to a style of performance because there's a style of performance that has developed in the culture of poetry slam. The national scene, a long time, was dominated by an organization called Poetry Slam Incorporated. And Mark Smith, the guy who invented the game that is Poetry Slam, invented it in Chicago. And this Poetry Slam Incorporated, PSI, was the organization that grew from that. There are regional slams, there are local slams that have nothing to do, and this organization has been sunsetted since in the past 10 years, about 10 years, I don't know, something like that. Before the pandemic, anyway, it had sunsetted. So the national stage, up until that time, Poetry Slam Incorporated had the big event was the National Poetry Slam. The beginning of August, they would have almost week-long series of events of a tournament of poetry slams. That's as quick as I can say that, I think. And then they also had an event called the Individual World Poetry Slam, which was an indie event. You didn't have to have a team. And they had a women's poetry slam. So if you lived your life as a woman, you could be in this slam. And it was a lot like IWIPS, the Individual World Poetry Slam. WOW PS, that's what's called, Women of the World Poetry Slam. That was another event. So 3 big events in the year of national level draw. So it would pull people from all over the country and overseas sometimes too.
Yep. And what is interesting is, you think about democratization of technology, right? Like you think about 1988 when the most powerful supercomputer could take up all of Kerouac. And today we have iPhone in our pocket that's like 3 times the power, right? And everybody has access to it. And would you say that the poetry slam made poetry accessible to the masses in a way that was not done before?
Yes, it gave a different door to the house of poetry. If you went back to the 80s, like you were talking about, you would have heard a lot of people talking in 90s and 2000s and 2010s. They would say things like, poetry needs to be rebranded. And once you see Poetry Slam, you're like, well, it has been. Poetry Slam did that.
Yep.
And it did give another on-ramp to a lot of people who never would have seen poetry, never would have tried their hand at it, never would have practiced or written that hard. And at first, there was a pretty big divide between so-called page or academic poets and so performance poets or slam poets. And those two have come together a lot because we have some phenomenal voices like Rachel McKibbin's, people who kind of gained their chops in slam, but Dee Matthews, they are phenomenal writers and performers and came up through slam. I will say there's also people like Jeffrey McDaniel, who was in my master's program. He did slam, so he went the other direction. In a way, I did too, but I had to have sort of a split. Like that was the big challenge, is to go from, even though my academic career was long, dim by the time I got to writer's block, I had been in an academic setting, and I had been on stages, and I had done things like that, but never for a score, and never for just whoever thinks, and never for like an audience that was not at a school, so it was a different kind of audience. So to use the word democratization is probably right, because there are people in the room you might not ever talk to otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
now I don't think there's that divide, but the divide was so strong and so kind of bad, because it's like, well, poetry slam is poetry. Academic poetry is poetry. Why do we have, like, we're all kind of doing the same thing? Like, would you argue that, somebody didn't get an MFA like William Shakespeare or, Robert Burns isn't a poet? No, they just did their thing. No one made them go to school or anything. But you had Taylor Mawley, who was in New York, I think at the time, started a series called Page Meets Stage, where they got a well-known page poet and a well-known performance poet and put them up together. Scott did that once. Scott Woods went with Kevin Young, and that was a really good pairing. I wasn't there, but it seems like a really good pairing. And I asked Taylor Mawley, and he let me do a couple here in Columbus. So I did 2 Page Meets Stages here. But now it doesn't seem as needed. Like, it just.
So is that a page poet and stage poet? Are those just colloquialisms, or is that something that's still in the culture as far as an identity?
Yeah, I think it's really colloquial. So if somebody calls themselves a performance poet, it feels like.
Ooh, cliffhanger. We'll be back in 2 weeks for part 2 of our interview with Louise Roberson, whom I would like to extend a very special thank you. Thank you as well to Mandar Kath, and of course, to you, our listeners. If you would like to help support the show, as well as other creative endeavors, you can find links to our Patreon, as well as Louise's, in the description. Poems and Potions is produced by Mandar Kath, Marquita Byers, and R. Taryn Lear. Music provided by Charity Dietrich. Sound support provided by A.D. Dietrich.